What's the most psycho thing your ex did after you moved on that you never told your new partner? I realized something was terribly wrong the moment I saw the stuffed dog on my welcome mat, its plastic eyes ripped out and dangling by threads of stuffing. At first, I stood there trying to make sense of what I was looking at, wondering if it was some cruel prank or a sick sort of warning. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I noticed a tiny piece of paper tied to the dog's mangled paw. The note read, "You can't escape me." I could barely process the words. Something about seeing that torn toy under the dim hallway light made my skin crawl. It felt like walking into a nightmare I thought I had left behind, but apparently it had followed me. That was the day I understood my ex was not just an ex. He was an obsession, and one so deeply twisted that I still struggle to explain how I didn't see it in the beginning. But maybe that's the point. You rarely notice danger when it's dressed up as love. I met him, let's call him Yaroslav, on a particularly rainy evening 3 years ago, when I was desperate for a ride and too soaked to even think straight. I had finished a long shift at work and stepped out into the storm without an umbrella, scolding myself for being unprepared. The streets were blocked by traffic, cabs were all taken, and I was about to resign myself to slogging home in the downpour. Then a black car pulled up. The passenger window slid down, revealing a man with a kind smile who asked if I needed help. It felt like a scene from a movie. A handsome stranger offering rescue, me cold and dripping. My first instinct was to refuse, but he seemed genuinely concerned. He assured me he lived nearby and wouldn't mind dropping me off. I remember hesitating for a heartbeat, but exhaustion and relief made me accept his offer. Inside the car, warm air from the vents surrounded me, and I noticed how meticulously neat everything was. No clutter on the seats, not even a stray receipt. Yaroslav was polite, well-spoken, and had a voice that somehow put me at ease. He told me he had just finished visiting a friend and was heading in my direction anyway. We talked lightly about the sudden storm, the city's perpetual traffic jams, and my job. At one point, he pulled over to buy me a paper cup of coffee from a small kiosk, insisting I must be freezing. In that short ride, I felt a sense of safety, as though I'd stumbled upon someone genuinely good and protective. By the time we reached my apartment building, I'd given him my phone number, after he politely asked if he could call me sometime. I stepped out of that car convinced I was stepping into something new and potentially wonderful. We had our first official date a few days later in a chic little restaurant near downtown. He arrived early, waiting with a bouquet of white lilies because he said I looked like the kind of woman who'd appreciate something elegant. We ended up talking for hours, sharing tidbits of our childhoods. He talked about his studies in business, how he wanted to start his own company someday, while I talked about growing up in a small town before moving to the city. He listened so attentively, eyes never leaving mine, that I felt seen, special. Thinking back, I recall how I noticed a flicker of sadness in his eyes whenever I mentioned any male friend or coworker. But at the time, I figured he was just protective. People can be a little jealous in the early phase of dating, right? That initial period felt like a whirlwind of romance. Yaroslav sent me flowers at work, bought me little gifts, even wrote me notes. He was charming, generous, full of surprises. We'd stay up all night talking about our goals and favorite authors. I remember my best friend teasing me about being so infatuated. She said something like, "Just watch out. Sometimes the biggest charmers hide the darkest secrets." I brushed it off as typical cynicism. At that point, I couldn't imagine anything sinister lurking beneath the warmth he showed me. Eventually, though, small warning signs began to appear. So subtle, I initially thought I was imagining them. When I was chatting with a male colleague once after work, Yaroslav happened to see us from a distance. The next time we met, he made several pointed remarks. "You two looked so cozy. Do you have some sort of history I should know about?" He tried to laugh it off, but his eyes were hard. Another time, I was at a friend's birthday party. He texted me nonstop, wanting me to send him pictures to prove who I was with. "Just so I can be sure you're safe," he said. I felt uneasy, but told myself that maybe he'd had a difficult past relationship, something that made him anxious. I believed I could reassure him by answering quickly, by letting him know I was loyal. It didn't occur to me that this was just the beginning of a pattern of control. The real shift happened around the 2-month mark of our relationship. Yaroslav showed up unannounced at my apartment one evening, claiming he was worried because I hadn't replied to his messages for a whole hour. My phone had been on silent while I napped, so I missed his calls. When I opened the door, his expression was wild, oscillating between concern and fury. He kept asking, "Where were you? Why didn't you pick up?" As if some unimaginable betrayal had taken place. His voice rose until he was nearly yelling. Then he stopped, apologized profusely, and explained he was terrified something had happened to me. He even cried a bit, saying, "I just couldn't bear losing you." He had a knack for twisting his anger into an expression of deep love. I ended up comforting him, telling him I was fine, that he didn't need to worry. Even though the scene left me unsettled, I told myself it was just passion, Over time, those moments repeated themselves. Little by little, it became normal for him to demand, "Call me back right away," or "Send me a selfie so I know where you are," and to bristle at any mention of another man in my vicinity. But he always managed to balance those demands with sweet gestures and heartfelt declarations. His affections were intense, almost addictive, and I convinced myself that I would rather have someone who loved me too much than not enough. My friends tried to talk to me, saying, "This is not healthy. He's controlling you." I'd argue, "He's just insecure. He's been hurt before," or "You don't understand how caring he can be." I was defending him because I thought love meant endurance, that you hold on even when it's hard. The final straw came about 4 months into our relationship, after he picked me up from the airport. I had been on a quick business trip with a coworker, a woman around my age, so it wasn't remotely romantic. The flight was delayed, I was exhausted, and all I wanted was to collapse in bed. Yet as soon as I got into his car, Yaroslav's anger crackled in the air. He was scowling. "So was it fun, hooking up with your coworker?" His words slapped me across the face. I asked him what he was talking about, and he began pounding his fists on the steering wheel, ranting about how I couldn't be trusted. The more I tried to explain that I'd been working, the more it seemed to confirm his twisted suspicion. We ended up pulling over on a lonely road, and he got out of the car to rant, shouting into the darkness. I was terrified he might do something violent, so I kept my distance. Finally, he muttered a string of curses and drove me home in tense silence. When we arrived, I took a breath, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "We're done. I can't do this anymore." He threatened me then in a voice I hardly recognized, saying, "If you walk away, I'll ruin you." I slammed the door and locked it behind me. Inside my apartment, I was shaking so badly I had to sit on the floor. I remember thinking, at least it's over now. He can't hurt me anymore. But that was naive. The worst was yet to come. For a while, he tried to get back together with me in classic manipulator fashion. He sent long texts apologizing, left flowers at my door with notes that said, "I'm sorry. I love you. I'll change." When I didn't respond, his messages turned hateful. "Who do you think you are ignoring me like this?" Followed by sudden pleas for forgiveness. At one point, I blocked his number and all his social media. He started making new accounts under fake names. It was exhausting. But I stood my ground, ignoring every attempt he made to contact me. Eventually, the barrage of messages slowed, and I allowed myself to think it was truly over. Months passed. I carried the trauma like a shadow, but tried to rebuild my life. I moved to a new position in my company where I met Oleg, a warm, steady presence, everything Yaroslav was not. Oleg and I clicked almost immediately. We shared a mutual sense of humor, talked about silly science fiction novels we both loved, and took coffee breaks together. He was polite and unassuming, never prying into my personal life. I noticed how comfortable I felt around him, how safe. Before long, we were dating, quietly and naturally, without drama. I felt so grateful to experience normalcy, to be free from frantic demands and jealousy. I told Oleg in vague terms that my last relationship had ended badly, that my ex was intense. I omitted details because part of me was embarrassed that I had stayed in such a controlling situation for so long. Oleg didn't push me. He simply said he was there if ever I wanted to talk. After what I'd been through, it was refreshing to have someone who respected my boundaries. For a few months, everything was blissful. I got used to receiving thoughtful affection that didn't come with strings attached, to not having to prove my loyalty at every turn. It felt like normal life again, a life where I could breathe. Then, small, unsettling things started happening. I occasionally noticed a car idling outside my apartment building at odd hours. Maybe it was my imagination, I told myself. One evening, I got into my own car after work and had this tingling sensation that someone was watching. I glanced around but saw nothing. The next day, a coworker mentioned a strange person who had asked questions about me at the front desk, claiming to be an old friend. No name was given, so we let it slide, but I felt uneasy. Weeks later, I received a text from a random number. "I know what you're doing." That was all. Another from a different number said, "Your new guy should be careful." More cryptic texts arrived with lines like, "You never know who's watching." With each new message, my heart raced. I tried blocking the numbers, but they kept coming from different sources. I changed my number entirely, letting only close friends and Oleg know. A few days after that, I got an email from an unknown address linking to photos of me from over a year ago. Photos only Yaroslav would have. They weren't explicit, but they were personal. I realized he must have saved them, or hacked into an old account. It was disturbing to see them out of context, used like blackmail, or a reminder that he still had access to my life. When I discovered a handwritten letter left at my door, I almost screamed. It was an envelope with no return address, containing a note that said, "You think you can hide behind your new boyfriend? Think again." My hands shook so hard, I had to sit on the floor. Right then, Oleg called to see if I wanted to meet for dinner, and I almost told him everything, but fear and shame stopped me. I didn't want him to look at me like I was a victim, or like I was bringing trouble into his life. I still believed I could handle it, and maybe, I reasoned, it would just go away. Yaroslav would get bored, find someone else. But it didn't go away. A week after the letter, I came home to that horrifying stuffed dog with the eyes torn out. A note reading, "You can't escape me." The visual of it, the cruelty, the specificity, it rattled me to my core. That night I was too petrified to stay alone in my apartment, so I checked into a small hotel near downtown, telling Oleg I had a sudden work obligation. Alone in that hotel room, I realized I was letting Yaroslav control me again, letting fear run my life, but I still wasn't ready to open up fully to Oleg. Part of me was terrified he'd confront Yaroslav and escalate the situation. The turning point arrived when Yaroslav actually appeared in person outside my office late one evening. I had stayed to finish a project, and as I stepped out of the building's main doors, I saw him, arms crossed, leaning on a lamppost. The sight of his face in the dim light made my throat go dry. He stared as I approached, and I froze, scanning the street for anyone else around, but it was deserted. He walked toward me, blocking my path. My mind screamed to run. He was calm, too calm. "Heard you've been talking about me," he said, voice low. "And you've got a new lover now. Did you tell him everything? Did you tell him what you did to me?" His words felt like poison. I told him to leave me alone, voice shaking. He grabbed my wrist so hard it hurt. I yanked free and managed to sprint for a taxi that was about to pull away at the curb, jumping in and shouting at the driver to go. I didn't look back. That night, I lay awake rethinking everything. The notes, the dog, the photos, the emails. This wasn't just childish harassment. It was a genuine threat, and I was foolish to think ignoring it would make it disappear. I finally told Oleg the bigger picture. He was horrified and angry, but he stayed calm, urging me to file a police report. I argued that I didn't have definitive proof it was him. No security footage that showed his face, no direct evidence besides the notes and my word. But Oleg insisted that we at least document it. The next day, we went to the police station, and I laid out every message, every letter, every strange incident. The officers said they would keep a file, but there wasn't much they could do unless he threatened violence or violated a restraining order. It was better than nothing, but it still felt woefully inadequate. Yaroslav must have sensed I was no longer silent. Perhaps through mutual acquaintances, he learned I had gone to the authorities. For a short stretch, he went quiet. No messages, no sightings. I cautiously hoped that maybe, faced with the possibility of legal action, he had backed off. My life settled into a semblance of normal. Oleg and I grew closer, and he offered to let me move in with him, especially since I felt uneasy in my own apartment. I accepted, grateful to have a partner who wanted to protect me. But just when I thought Yaroslav was gone for good, he made one final move that was worse than anything before. I came home after a farewell gathering for a colleague, intending to grab a few items before I fully moved in with Oleg. The moment I unlocked my door, I saw that the lock had been tampered with. Stepping inside, I discovered chaos. Furniture overturned, drawers dumped out, and glass from a broken mirror scattered everywhere. On one wall, written in thick black marker, were the words, "This is just the beginning." I could barely breathe. A rush of dizziness overcame me, and I stepped back outside, calling the police with trembling fingers. Oleg arrived moments later, looking grim. Once the police turned up, we explained everything again, showing them the ongoing record of harassment. Because there was clear evidence of a break-in, they investigated more seriously this time. Still, there was no security camera in the hallway, and neighbors had only noticed some noise earlier but couldn't identify the intruder. No solid proof linked him to the break-in. It was maddening and terrifying, but at least the situation was officially on record. The entire experience shattered any illusion I had that Yaroslav might change. In the weeks that followed, there were no new letters, no new threats. It was as though that violent outburst of destruction was his last statement. A friend who still moved in some of the same social circles as Yaroslav told me he'd bragged about leaving the city, possibly even going abroad. I didn't know if it was a bluff, but everything went quiet. Bit by bit, my pulse began to slow when I walked down the street or opened my email. I moved the rest of my belongings into Oleg's place, changed my address, and installed a better security system. I stayed in therapy for a while, working through the lingering fear that Yaroslav might reappear at any moment. It's been over a year now since that final incident. As far as I know, Yaroslav is gone. Whether he ran off somewhere else or is just biding his time, I can't say for certain. I've learned to live with a cautious optimism, checking behind me when I walk alone and telling myself that if he ever does come back, I won't hesitate to involve the police immediately. Oleg remains my rock. Loving, supportive, patient. He knows most of the story, though not every chilling detail. I never told him about the stuffed dog with the gouged out eyes, or some of the more vile text messages. In his mind, The break-in and the threats were horrific enough. Part of me wants to spare him from imagining what truly sadistic lengths my ex went to. Another part still fears the judgment that might follow if I shared how deeply I was entangled in that toxic mess. Would he question how I let it go that far? Or why I didn't ask for help sooner? But Oleg has never shown any hint of blame toward me. He's only ever offered empathy, a promise that he won't let me face it alone. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I jolt awake from a dream where I'm unlocking my door and find another animal corpse, or more cryptic threats written across my walls. My heart hammers in my chest until I realize I'm safe in Oleg's apartment, that the door has a new lock, that I'm no longer the isolated, insecure person I was before. Yet the scars remain. Even now, I wrestle with telling the complete truth, because deep down, I want to believe I've left that nightmare forever in the past. And maybe I have, but trauma has a way of casting long shadows. I share this story as a cautionary tale for anyone who brushes off the early signs, the constant texting, the intrusive questions, the possessive comments about your friends or coworkers. I learned the hard way that controlling behavior rarely stops at words. It escalates, sometimes to the point of psychological and even physical terror. People often say, "Why don't you just leave?" Or, "Why didn't you see the red flags sooner?" It's rarely that simple. When you're caught in the cycle of being adored one moment and vilified the next, you question your own perceptions. You start thinking maybe you're overreacting, maybe it's not that bad, or maybe you can fix them. But no one can fix a person who refuses to see their own brokenness. If I could talk to my younger self, I'd tell her, do not ignore your instincts when you feel afraid or uneasy. Do not be silenced by shame or fear of judgment. Tell a friend, a family member, the police, anyone who can help. Because once someone decides they own you, you can't rely on them to suddenly understand reason. It might take everything you have to break free, but every step you take away from that toxicity is a step closer to reclaiming your life. I'm not entirely free of the past. I still have moments where the memory of his voice saying, "You're mine," crawls beneath my skin. But I am learning that with each day, each loving gesture from Oleg, each new chapter I open in my life, I can redefine myself outside of being a victim. I survived. And I learned that real love doesn't demand your every minute, doesn't reduce you to paranoid tears, doesn't show up at your door wielding fear like a weapon. Real love fosters trust, respect, and security. That's why I haven't told Oleg everything. I guess some remnants of shame or embarrassment still hold me back. It's not that I doubt his capacity for kindness, but rather that reliving those details is like reopening a wound. Maybe one day, when I'm ready, I'll show him every vile text, every menacing photo. He deserves the full truth, and I deserve the chance to share it without guilt or self-hatred. But I'm taking it one step at a time, and he understands that. So here I am in a peaceful apartment, typing this out while Oleg is quietly reading in the next room. The walls are painted a gentle shade of blue. There's soft lighting, and I no longer have any locks that remind me of forced entries. Outside, the city is humming, oblivious to how, not so long ago, my life was a real-life horror film I couldn't escape. I've made it my mission to turn the page, to reclaim every aspect of myself that was battered by fear. In some ways, telling this story is my final act of defiance against what Yaroslav tried to do. I refuse to stay silent, to pretend it never happened. That only gives him more power in my head. If there's anything I want people to take from this, it's that your intuition is worth listening to. Your boundaries are worth defending, and it's okay to ask for help. The scariest part for me was admitting I couldn't handle it all alone. That admission saved me. I don't know if I'll ever hear from Yaroslav again. Maybe he's finally moved on to some other fixations. Or maybe he's waiting, but I'm not waiting. I'm living, loving, and healing. And if he does ever reappear, I'm prepared in a way I never was before, with the law on my side, with friends who know my story, and with a partner who won't back down if I need him. Even though Oleg doesn't know about the torn-eyed toy dog left on my mat, or the obscene messages that used to keep me awake at night, he's aware of the fundamental truth. My ex was dangerous, obsessive, and absolutely unwilling to let go. Oleg respects that I can't just shrug off the past. I may always have a bit of fear guiding my steps in the dark, but he holds my hand through it, and that's the future I choose. So, yes, the craziest, most psycho thing my ex did after I moved on was to launch a campaign of intimidation, spying on me, sending me gruesome little gifts, scrawling threats on my walls, even smashing into my apartment. I never revealed every detail to my new partner, partly to protect myself from reliving that trauma, partly because I feared he might not see me the same way if he knew how deeply I had been entrapped. But I found that the right person doesn't judge. The right person stands beside you, unwavering. The day may come when I will sit down with Oleg and say, "There's more I need to tell you." Until then, I carry the knowledge that I'm no longer the petrified woman who cowered in hotel rooms, too scared to go home. I am someone who survived madness and learned to trust again. And that, I think, is the greatest triumph of all.